Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Movie Review, show number 2. Ventman here. The Bradster will not be joining us for this one. He has a few things going on this week. Hope everything's all right with him, but I figure I'd just do a little show here, review 4 movies on my own, and hopefully when Brad rejoins us for the next time around, we'll be back to our regular format. Got a couple interesting ones this time around. Let's see, one science fiction, well, actually, 2 science fiction, got one sort of horror, and I've got a documentary one, not necessarily in that order. So without further ado, let's begin. First movie I wanted to review was something I had first heard about on the Monster Men podcast. It's an independent movie from 2013 called Absence. It's not to be confused. I think there's a bunch of movies called Absence, but this particular one was 2013. It's about an 80-minute runtime. You can get it on Netflix. So this falls into the whole category again of the found footage movie, basically where common theme where someone gets a camera and starts recording stuff allegedly in real time, and this time for this one, what they're recording or what unbeknownst to them, they turn out recording is an alien impregnation and abduction. So the movie starts out pretty interesting. You see this girl, Liz, her name is, and I forgot the actress who plays her. Erin Way. Erin Way is the name of the actress. She's pretty good, actually. She basically is pregnant, and all of a sudden the baby is gone. And she's being investigated by the police and all that, and somehow this is all being recorded by her brother, Rick, and they decide to, Liz, her husband, Evan, and Rick, her brother, decide to go up to the country or whatever state they're in, upstate, or to get away, the cabin, so to speak. So they go up there, and of course, Rick continues recording with his camera, and you catch a few interesting little things I won't get into. He catches a few things on tape, a few little special effects, particularly one which involves a really kind of a gross one, which involves his sister's arm and something which is appearing to crawl through it. During the process, there's a little bit of lightheartedness. Rick ends up hooking up with this girl, Megan, and it's kind of interesting because he's a bit of a douchebag. So that kind of adds the lightness to the story, but in the meantime, you're still seeing what's happening with the sister. She's getting very sick and weak, and that progresses through the movie, and it all kind of culminates at the end with, I won't tell you, but basically the aliens are coming for her. So I got to give this one, I can't be too generous with this one. I'll give it 2 stars. Probably worth watching if you're into the sort of found footage thing. I think it would have probably been a lot better if they didn't do it that way, if they just did it as a standard movie. But in any case, it's got a little bit of excitement. It drags at times. You get a little bit of humor with Rick and Megan. Not so much with the sister, of course, but somewhat enjoyable. Give it a look if you get a chance. And once again, it's called Absence, 80-minute runtime, and it's on Netflix. Now, the second movie I wanted to review was something I'd seen constantly all over my Roku box, and it used to appear on the little promo thing on the side, and I said finally, let me watch this thing. And the movie is called Tucker and Dale vs. Evil. Really didn't know what to expect. I had no concept of what the synopsis was beforehand. It's about a 90-minute runtime. You can rent this on Amazon or Vudu. You can also, if you have a Hulu subscription, you can get it for free. So basically, this is your standard group of college kids in the woods movie, but a little bit of a better twist to it. Basically, these boys and girls from some unnamed college go camping in the woods, and they stop at a general store, and they see the 2 title characters, Tucker and Dale, and they don't interact too much, but they're both suspicious of each other, and they kind of go their way. Tucker and Dale are going to their cabin that they sort of purchased or rented or something up in the woods, and the kids are going generally to the same area. And as a matter of fact, they end up camping out somewhere outside the cabin. Um, the funny thing about this movie is that Tucker and Dale are actually kind of nice guys, even though they're extremely dumb and they're hillbilly types. And whatever they do, like the college kids accidentally misconstrue it as them being psychotic crazies. Like one night they happen to be skinny dipping out in the pond, and Tucker and Dale are out that night fishing. And I guess the girl, the main character, Allison, her name is, bumps her head and she falls in the water. And then the guys come along and they rescue her, and they start saying, "We got you, girl, here. We got you, girl." And meantime, the kids are taking it up as to mean like that they've taken her hostage, and they bring it to the cabin. They actually are like nursing her back to health legitimately, and she's even befriending them. But meantime, the kids think these two guys are psychotic crazies, serial killers or something. And it turns out that the cabin that they are in actually 20 years before had a situation where there were two psychotic killers in there, and they killed college students, so that makes it even worse. But it gets progressively funnier and funnier, and it turns out there's a showdown later in the movie between Tucker and Dale and the college kids, and blood is shed, and there's a police officer involved, and it gets very funny. All right, I have to give it credit. I stayed watching. It was enjoyable, funny. Tucker and Dale are good. The male college lead, I forget his name, and the girl who plays Allison are pretty good actor and actresses. So I'm going to give this one a much better rating. Held my interest, great comedy. I'm going to give this one 3.5 stars. So again, Tucker and Dale versus Evil. It's you can rent it on Amazon or Vudu and possibly some other ways, or you can watch it for free if you have a Hulu subscription. Very enjoyable and quite funny. All right, so let's move on to movie number 3, and we'll chalk this up to the disappointment category here. This was an independent movie that was filmed in Dallas back in 2004. I saw that it was a science fiction movie involving time travel, so that kind of got my attention. It was a low-budget movie. The name of the movie is Primer. It's about a 78-minute runtime, and this is also one of those movies that's directed, produced, written by, and starring one guy. His name is Shane Carruth, actually, and I'm going to presume that he's from the Dallas area. But he's not just a 4-tool player, he's a 7-tool player. He also wrote the music for the movie, did the casting and the editing, and all for a $7,000 budget. So this is truly a low-budget movie. Not that it couldn't have been a lot better. Let me give you the premise here. You have these two main characters. The names are Aaron and Abe. I think Aaron is the Shane Carruth character. And it actually starts out with two other guys at first. And basically they're researchers of some sort. And, they get funding from somewhere. And they're in their garage making their inventions, whatever. And I guess among their projects, they're trying to figure out a way to make objects weigh less, to reduce their mass. So they're doing all sorts of things, and you kind of see them screw up and fail as well and blow things up and whatnot. But they accidentally discover an anomaly, I guess, when one of them puts their watch in this box that they've created. The watch comes out that it's got like 13,000 times as much use as it should have for the time it was in there. So the two characters, Aaron and Abe, put 2 and 2 together, and they've determined that they've made a time machine. So they do the right thing, and they immediately secretively cut the other two guys out. You don't really see them much for the rest of the movie, so they screw those two guys out of everything. And basically they fine-tune the thing, and they discover that they've got a box that can send you back in time for 6 hours. Well, back in time 6 hours. So they kind of develop this little methodology during the movie, like make sure you get away from the box so you don't run into your double. Um, and basically for that 6 hour period, like they go into the box, they sedate themselves, or one of them at a time, and when they come out, it's like 6 hours before. So what do? Like beforehand, they look at the stock market, and they look at all these little things, and they start making day trades to get rich and thus finance more of their experiments and everything. So it's an interesting movie. It gets a little bit better later on, in some ways. A third party, namely the father of the girlfriend of Aaron's girlfriend, accidentally, or he discovers the box and he uses it, and then the mayhem sort of begins. I was kind of disappointed. I mean, the premise of the movie is excellent. They've even got these, somebody's developed these little charts that kind of show you like the little time travel loop that they get themselves into. I'll put it up as a graphic. That's all very good, but it kind of, particularly at the beginning, it dragged. The characters are not very interesting. The lighting is a little bit, you don't get that sense of drama, for what the plot is. They don't develop that enough. The scenery is not, you're kind of in only two or three places at once. Dialogue, meh. So very good premise for the movie, just very bad or very poor execution. It's disappointing. So again, it does culminate in some action later in the movie. Won't give away too much. Little incident at a party that they use the time machine to save or rescue, and culminates in a very interesting ending, which I was kind of, by the time it did get to the end, I had to actually rewatch it again because it was kind of dragging at that point. So, in summary, for Primer, unfortunately, I have to give it a low rating. I can only give it about 1.5 stars. Uh, Hopefully, maybe someday in the future, somebody will pick this up and turn it into a more fleshed out movie with better characters, maybe expound on the premise a little and the research end of it. I didn't mind that there wasn't like a lot of special effects. Basically, it's like, normally if you did a movie about time travel, you'd be seeing like flashes of light and maybe all these special effects. No, basically they just kind of get in the box and then you see them getting out of the box 6 hours earlier. That's the extent of the special effects. No lights, no fancy, no nothing. So that part I actually that was intriguing, because it didn't mussy up the plot. But they had to develop it a lot better than they did. So Primer, sorry, 1.5 stars. Hopefully Shane Carruth has other stuff out there. Not really sure. I didn't really follow him on IMDb, but if he can do everything in one movie, maybe he can do one thing better in another movie. So, okay, now I saved the best for last. I forget which channel, one of my Roku channels. I was looking around, and there was a section on one of the obscure channels about music documentaries. And I saw one that was called A Band Called Death, and it said something about the first, or something to the effect of the first punk band, and I had kind of heard, I thought somebody had mentioned this group Death to me a ways ago, but I decided, let me give this a watch. It's about I think it's a 90-minute runtime. No, it's a little longer than that. It might be a 2-hour runtime. I forgot to write it down, but this movie tells the story very well. This is like every musician's dream. Like you're playing and you think one day you're going to make it big. For these guys, it took a little longer to make it big. They started out and this is all kind of done in a documentary. You're seeing it in the present day, or which is 2012 actually. It's the year the movie was made, and they're kind of doing flashbacks, or they're talking about their past through just discussion and video footage and sort of on location where things happen. They started out in the early 70s. Three African American brothers. Let's get that straight. From Detroit, the home of Motown and blues and funk and all that. They started out as a sort of a funk band, and then they went to a Who concert, and they said, "This is what we want to do." And then they also went to see Alice Cooper and some other bands, but by 1974 they said, "We're doing rock." So they actually had a deal. They recorded. They were planning to record 12 songs, and they had Clive Davis. Who's he from? I forget which record company he's from. A major record company, and he was ready to sign them. And they said that the band's name was Death, and that was the sticking point. And he said, "Your music's really good. We just kind of need you to change the name." But the three brothers, they're named Bobby, Danis, and David. And David was sort of the leader of the driving force. And he said, "No, we're not changing the name." So they ended up on their own, sort of doing 7 of the 12 songs. One of them was sort of released as a sort of a single, and that was kind of the end of it. And 3 years later, they sort of disbanded. And you're seeing this all through flashbacks again. You're seeing the room that they used to jam in, the people who used to engineer the stuff with them, some footage of the mother, etc. A backstory about their father, who was very sadly killed in an electrical accident. And so basically the story is that they moved to Vermont. They form a gospel band in Vermont. One of the brothers, David, the driving force brother, is not too happy up there. He decides to come back to Detroit, does his own thing. The brothers continue up in Vermont as a reggae band for many years called Lamb's Bread. David he's fighting alcoholism as he's back in Detroit. You don't really see too much footage of David. That's what kind of makes him like almost a mysterious figure in this, like a Syd Barrett type. You catch a little bit of him in later life through the woman he married, but sadly he passes away in the year 2000, and there was actually, I believe there was a little footage of his funeral and the memorial service in this movie. And so life goes on for these brothers. They've been doing the reggae thing for a number of years, and presumably they have regular jobs also. And they each get married and have 5 kids up in Vermont. So Burlington, Vermont. So 3 of Bobby's children, Bobby Jr. and Uriah and I forget Julian, I believe, they formed their own band called Rough Francis, and they actually you can find them, their website and everything. It's pretty good music. So one of their friends was at a rave party, no, one of the sons, pardon me, with his friend was at a rave party, and they happened to hear somebody playing that single from the band Death. And the boy's like, "That's my dad." So here it is 30 some odd years later, and the Death single that got released is still circulating as a bootleg or whatever. And eventually the fathers dug out all the master tapes and generated a ton of interest, and so much interest that they actually, 2009, 35 years later, they finally get their record deal. So, a small-time record company actually put their album out as something called For the World to See, and they live the dream. 33 years late, and in their brother's memory, but it's a heartwarming story when you see, like, this could be you you do something as a kid, and then all of a sudden, instead of coming back to haunt you, it comes back to help you. And a great story, just a lot of emotion. They ended up putting out 3 more albums after that of the original music, and they still perform today. They actually, since the one brother died, I guess the guitarist from the reggae band is now the guitarist for the newly formed Death. And they also kind of show you the sadness in the movie, where they kind of return to Detroit one last time to bury their mom, who is shown in the movie to be a big influence throughout. I was very, very impressed with the movie. Obviously the music is very good. I actually went out and paid for it, the old-fashioned way. I paid for the music. two of their albums. It's called For the World to See. That's their first album, and the second album is called Spiritual, Mental, Physical. And then there's two more now, so I haven't gotten them yet. But very impressed with the music. Very impressed with the movie, and hopefully, maybe if I ever get to Vermont, I'll watch either them or their kids band play. I'm giving this one 4.5 stars. It's a long sit through. I think the runtime was pretty extensive. I'll double check that, but it's worth it. You get to see Detroit in a lot of context. It's just you're watching a really cool story about these guys who just played around back in the 70s and who eventually, through hardship and perseverance, they made it. Everybody's dream. So catch that one on Amazon Prime. You can get it on Vudu. I guess you can rent it on Google Movies. There's a lot of places. It might even be on YouTube by now, but you can definitely get it at those locations. So I think we've got all four of our movies in here. Absence, that gets 2 stars. Tucker and Dale versus Evil, that's 3.5 stars. Primer, that's 1.5 stars, and A Band Called Death, I give that one 4.5 stars. Good documentary. Get well, Bradster, and hopefully we will see you again soon. Bye-bye.